Ah, the good old days of jQuery selectors. Don't you sometimes wish you can use jQuery selectors in your NativeScript applications? Wouldn't it be just easier to select a UI element by its class name programmatically? Well, folks, today I'm going to show you how to select those UI elements by class name in NativeScript. Coming right up. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Alex. Yes, please JavaScriptify. Selecting UI elements by class name is not something you can do out of the box in NativeScript. You can select elements by ID by calling getViewById, but this will return only the elements that are children of the element that you're calling that function on. For example, if you have a label with an ID of myLabel, and then you get the reference to the containing page, you can call getViewById on that page and pass in myLabel to get that label. But if you want to get a hold of another rendered element that's outside of that page, you don't have a method for doing that. How can we select all the elements that match a certain condition? Like, for example, all the elements that have a certain CSS class name on them. Well, that's what we're going to do today. By the way, in this tutorial, we're going to be building on top of the tutorial I did earlier, where we find the top UI frame. If you haven't seen that yet, I did that earlier in the week. I'll link to it down below in the description, so check that out as well. All right, let's take a look. All right, here we are. We're going to start out with a Hello World application, and this is what it looks like. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to go to main page, and I'm going to add a few other things here. So let's see. We have an action bar. We don't need page.action bar. We can just have an action bar there. And this has a class called action bar. That's fine. We have a stack layout, and we have some classes on the label here and the button. So we do have some stuff to select. I'm going to try to select this button and this label. Actually, there's two labels that share the same class, so that's perfect. Okay, I want to be able to tap this button here and have it find certain elements on the screen by their CSS classes. So I'm going to take this onTap handler, and I'm just going to, instead of data binding it, I'm going to have this in the code behind. So let's go to main page code behind, and here I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to export one called onTap, and this is where we're going to say get elements by class name, because there might be multiple elements, and then we want to pass in some class name. For example, text center. So let's do that. I'm going to pass that in. So here I'm expecting to get some views back. I'm going to say const else for elements, and I'm going to go ahead and console log this. Console log the else. All right. So we need to create this function, this magical function. Let's do that. I'm going to create a new file here called utils.ts. And I'm going to paste in a couple of things here that we've already created in the tutorial that I did for getting the correct frames, and then a subsequent tutorial that's also going to get us the top UI frame without ID. So I've created some functions there that are helper functions. And I explain why we do this in those videos. So check that out. I'll link that down below in the description. This will get us the topmost frame in the entire UI stack of our application. So this function get top UI frame. So now that we have that, let's create the actual function that we need, which is get elements by class name. So I'm going to copy that and export it here, paste that, and then we're going to pass in the class name as a string. Now, this is going to return a bunch of elements. So I'm going to add that to a collection. I'm going to call that retval. It's going to be just an array of those elements. And we're going to start at the top. So I'm going to need to get that top frame in the UI stack. I'm going to call that function, that helper function that I've created called getTopUIFrame. So we're going to look at the top frame, see if it has those classes. If it does, then add them to this array, and then look at its children, and so on and so on. Does that ring a bell? Sounds like we need a recursive function here, don't we? So let's create that recursive function. So I'm going to create a function here called, I'll call this getViewChildren by class name. All right, so I'm going to pass in the view, which is going to be a view-based type. We want to look at this view and its children. Remember, frame, page, button, label, they all inherit from view and view-base. So that's why we're passing in view-base. And then we're going to pass in this class name as a string. And then we're going to pass in an array where we aggregate all these elements. So this is going to be a view-based array. Now, what does this function do? The first thing we want to do is check this view for CSS classes. So each view-base has CSS classes on on it, which is a property, which is a set. So if you take a look at the definition of CSS classes, you see that it's a set of strings. Now you can try going through this and doing a for loop and seeing if anything matches, but luckily there's a convenience function that we can use called has. And we can just pass in the class name to see if it's in the list or if it's in that set. So if it is, then we're going to say aggregate push, and we're going to push that view onto our aggregate array. Done. Well, not done yet, but close. Then we're going to look at the view's children. So each view base has each child function on it. So for each of the children of the view base, we're going to look at them and we're going to run some code. So if you take a look at here, the error says that the argument of type void is not assignable to parameter of type boolean. So this function must return some kind of boolean. I'm going to return true here because there is no other case here. We need to return true. And then inside here, I'm going to run this function again recursively for each one of the children. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And I'm going to pass in now the child, which is VB. I'm going to pass in the same exact class name that we're searching for. And finally, I'm going to pass in the aggregate, which contains all of our found view bases so far. Awesome. The external function that we're going to use is this get elements by class name, and that's what we're calling here. I just need to go ahead and do a little import here. Let's make sure I spelled it correctly. Copy that, paste it here. I didn't actually call my recursive function, so let's do that. Get view children by class name. I'm going to pass in my root frame here. Then I'm going to pass in my class name. And finally, I'm going to pass in this red val array that's going to contain all our view bases eventually. Back in main page, I just need to import this. Visual Studio Code is not really helping me here for some reason, so I'm going to reload my window, and sometimes that works. And now I get the little bubble. Okay, import. I'm just too lazy to write this out sometimes, so I want Visual Studio Code to do it for me. All right, let's check it out. I'm going to open my console. I'm going to open the app. I'm going to hit tab here and check it out. I'm looking for that label and I got two of them. Here's one label. It's in main page. And here's another label. It's also in main page. And that's true. That is in fact those two labels with that text center class, and they are both in main page. What if I were to look for H1 as the class? Let's go over here and look for H1 instead of text center. I'm going to hit tab here, and we only get one label because that's the H1. You can get any element this way. If you want to get the action bar, you can. If you want to get the page, you can. So here I'm going to pass in page as the class name and tab, and there we go. We get page. Now, one other thing that we didn't define and that we can get a hold of is the root UI element, and that's this frame right here. Now, you can see that this frame doesn't actually have any class names, right? However, NativeScript Framework automatically assigns class names on this frame for us. And if you've seen my video on the NativeScript 6.1 baked-in CSS classes, then you'll know that the root element actually gets a few classes assigned. For example, NSRoot is one of them. So I'm going to hit tab here, and you'll see that we get the frame, and that's the approot.xml. That's the root frame right here. This frame actually gets, at runtime, a CSS class called NSRoot. It also has a bunch of other CSS classes on it that are helpful, and you can check out that video on my channel. I'll link to it down below. Now, get elements by class name is just one selector that we can use that's similar to the way jQuery selectors worked. You can also create other selectors like get elements by ID. You might say that, oh, well, page already has get view by ID on it. So if I go to page, get view by ID, then this will give you the ID, but the difference is that this will only give you the children of this page by ID. It won't give you the elements anywhere in your UI stack by ID. There was an element with an ID that's not the child of the page. This function would not return that. I won't bother going through creating that function. It's just going to be very similar to this get elements by class name function. All right, I hope that helps some of you out. And of course, you can extend this not only to use CSS selectors, but other attribute selectors as well. All you got to do is just modify the logic of that function a little bit. All right, let's take a look at some of your comments that you left me for this video about the NativeScript CLI info command and runtime updates. In this video, I show you this command, the CLI info command, and how useful it can be, and how to update only a certain part of your project, like the iOS runtime, for example. Check that video out if you haven't seen it already. It's very helpful. Leo Croft Stewart says, yes, I would be interested in a course. And they're responding to my comment that says, would you be interested in a video course that deep dives into the NativeScript CLI? If you are interested in something like that, also comment down below. While I do cover a lot of CLI related topics and only the most important core commands in some of the pro courses on nativescripting.com, we don't have a deep dive on the CLI. So if you want a course like that, let me know in the comments. Coursero Nero says, hello Alex, your videos are always great. Thank you so much for that. What if I built my project with NativeScript 5.1.1 and would upgrade to the latest? I tried, but unfortunately it doesn't work anymore because it uses the old plugins. So I have to update my plugins first and then the version, which is the right sequence. Thank you. Well, Coursera, if you're using lots of plugins, it depends on the plugins because plugin authors publish their updates at different times. Sometimes they don't publish the updates. Sometimes they have different versions that they support with their plugins. You really have to read the documentation of the plugins. What I recommend you do is actually set up a brand new project based on the Hello World template in the latest version of NativeScript, and then add the plugins that you use one at a time to make sure that they work with the latest version. And if you come to a plugin that breaks the build, then you know that's the culprit. Then you can leave an issue in the GitHub repository or try to work around. If all the plugins actually work with the latest version of NativeScript, then maybe there's something that's in your code that needs to be updated. There are API changes that come from version to version in NativeScript, so you have to check the NativeScript documentation and make sure that your code is actually up to date as well. And Andy Lib says, yes, please, this would be great for a purist such as myself. I think Andy's also referring to my comment about the CLI course. Thanks a lot for your comments, folks, and I will see you in the next video.